China just did something that has only happened 3 times in history, and every single time, it signaled the death of a reserve currency. In the first quarter of 2024, the Chinese government dumped $53.3 billion in US Treasury bonds. Not gradually. Not cautiously. In 3 months, they liquidated more American debt than at any point in modern financial history. At the same time, they accumulated over $340 billion in gold reserves since 2022, and that's just the official number. The real figure, accounting for purchases through state-owned entities operating in London, Zurich, and Hong Kong, is likely double that amount. Maybe more. This isn't a trade dispute. This isn't economic policy. This is a nation reading the last chapter of a very old book, and getting out before the ending they know is coming. Because here's what most people don't understand, this exact sequence has played out before. Every single time a reserve currency collapsed, it started exactly like this. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Roman provincial governors secretly hoarding gold coins while paying their taxes in debased silver. It doesn't matter if you're talking about French bankers in 1965 demanding their gold back from the Bank of England. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Weimar Germany's foreign creditors converting Reichsmarks to hard assets in 1922. The pattern is always identical. First, peripheral powers recognize the debasement. They see the money printing, the deficit explosion, the lies about inflation. Then, they silently convert their paper holdings into real assets, gold, land, commodities, anything that can't be printed into oblivion. Then the dump accelerates as others catch on. And finally, they watch from a safe distance as the center collapses under the weight of its own currency. Beijing isn't innovating here. They're not pioneering some new financial strategy. They're following a script written in the 3rd century, refined in the 1920s, and perfected in the 1960s. And they're doing it with ruthless precision. While American media obsesses over TikTok bans and congressional hearings, Chinese cargo planes land in Shanghai every week carrying gold bars by the ton, 400 troy ounces each, stacked on pallets, rolled into climate-controlled warehouses that didn't exist 5 years ago. Every month, another $20 to $40 billion in treasury bonds quietly sold on secondary markets. No press releases. No announcements. No explanations. The numbers tell the story. China held $1.1 trillion in US Treasuries at their peak. Today? $775 billion. That's a $325 billion reduction in just 18 months. That's not portfolio rebalancing. That's an exit strategy. And they're not alone. Russia dumped 96% of its treasury holdings. Japan has reduced its position by $240 billion since 2022. Saudi Arabia cut its US debt holdings by 34%. The smart money isn't just worried. The smart money is already gone. To understand why this matters, why this isn't just another geopolitical headline you can ignore, you need to see the pattern. Because the pattern never changes. Only the names and dates. The pattern is always identical. It unfolds in 6 predictable stages, and once you understand them, you'll see exactly where we are right now, and it's not pretty. Stage 1, confidence peak. The reserve currency dominates everything. 60 to 70% of global transactions flow through it. Every central bank holds it. Every commodities trader prices in it. Every international contract settles in it. The debasement is happening, but it's hidden, buried in technical reports, disguised as quantitative easing, justified as temporary stimulus. The world still believes. Stage 2, the crack. Peripheral powers, the ones actually holding massive reserves of this paper, start noticing things. The money printing accelerates. The deficits explode. The currency manipulation becomes impossible to ignore. These aren't financial amateurs. They're sophisticated central banks with armies of analysts. And they start doing the math. They start asking uncomfortable questions. They start planning. Stage 3, silent accumulation. This is where it gets deadly. The smart money begins converting paper reserves into hard assets, gold, commodities, strategic land purchases, anything real, but they do it quietly. No announcements. No press conferences. No honesty. Because the moment everyone knows, the exit gets crowded. The first ones out get $1,800 per ounce of gold. The last ones will be lucky to get anything real at all. Stage 4, the reveal. Eventually, the accumulation becomes impossible to hide. Financial reporters start noticing the pattern. Markets begin connecting dots. Someone publishes the data. And suddenly, everyone realizes what's happening. This is when panic sets in. This is when the whispers become screams. Stage 5, the dump accelerates. Now it's a race. Every holder of the dying currency rushes to the same exit simultaneously. Imagine dominoes falling in slow motion, each one larger than the last. The selling pressure becomes unstoppable. The currency's value begins free falling. And the death spiral feeds itself. Each drop creates more panic, more selling, more collapse. Stage 6. Currency collapse. From the moment Stage 4 begins, from the moment the dumping becomes public knowledge, the timeline is brutally consistent, 18 to 36 months until reserve status is lost. Once global reserves drop below 40% of international transactions, the collapse accelerates exponentially. There's no recovery. There's no soft landing. There's just the ending. Here's why it keeps happening. Every hegemon believes they can print their way out because they're the reserve currency. They think the rules don't apply to them. They think their military, their economy, their history makes them special. They think this time is different. But here's the trap they never see: the reserve currency status itself is what creates the catastrophic scale of the collapse. The more dominant you were, the harder you fall. Because everyone's holding your paper. And when everyone tries to get rid of it at once, there's nowhere for the value to hide. The pattern is always identical. The peripheral powers see it first, because they're holding the paper. The center always discovers last, because they're printing it. Let me show you exactly how this played out before. We'll start in the 3rd century, when Rome was the financial center of the known world, until it wasn't. Fast forward to the 3rd century AD. Rome stands at the apex of human civilization. The Roman denarius is the dollar of its time, a silver coin that buys goods from Britain to Egypt, from the Atlantic coast to the Persian frontier. It's accepted across 3 continents. It's the currency that pays the legions, finances the aqueducts, and oils the machinery of an empire controlling 30% of the known world's GDP. The denarius is 95% pure silver. When you drop it on a table, it rings with a distinctive, clear chime that merchants recognize instantly. That sound is the sound of trust. That sound is the sound of money that holds its value. For over 2 centuries, this system works flawlessly. Then comes the crisis. The plague of Cyprian sweeps through the empire in 249 AD, killing millions. Simultaneously, barbarian invasions hammer every border: Germanic tribes in the north, Persian armies in the east, rebellions in Africa. The military budget explodes. Tax revenues collapse as plague-ravaged provinces can barely feed themselves, let alone pay tribute to Rome. Emperor Decius faces a choice that will echo through history: default on the military, watch the empire collapse from invasion, or debase the currency and buy time. He chooses debasement. At first, it's subtle. The denarius goes from 95% silver to 90%. Then 85%. Then 80%. Citizens don't really notice. The coins look similar. They still spend the same way. But out in the provinces, in Gaul, in Hispania, in North Africa, the governors notice. These men aren't fools. They run regional economies. They collect taxes in coin and pay soldiers with the same coins. And they start to feel the difference. The coins are lighter. The silver is duller. When dropped, they no longer ring with that distinctive chime, they clunk like cheap pottery. Bite the edge, and you can taste the copper beneath the silver wash. The debasement has begun, and the provinces are holding the worthless paper. So they do exactly what China is doing today: they start hoarding the old coins. Every time a high silver denarius passes through their hands, it goes into their personal treasury. Every time they pay taxes to Rome or pay their soldiers, they use the new debased coins. They begin converting wealth into gold jewelry, into land, into grain stores, anything that can't be debased by imperial decree. This goes on quietly for years. Rome, meanwhile, accelerates the debasement. By 260 AD, under Emperor Valerian, the denarius is 50% silver. By 268 AD, under Gallienus, it's 5% silver and 95% base metal. It's barely a silver coin anymore, it's copper with a silver coating so thin you can scratch it off with your fingernail. Provincial governors melted down their hoarded old denarii in secret. They watched the pure silver pool at the bottom of the crucible while slag floated to the top. They knew exactly what they were holding: real money versus the emperor's lie. Then comes the reveal. By the 270s, old high silver denarii have completely vanished from circulation. Gresham's law in action: bad money drives out good. No one will spend real silver when they can spend fake silver. The good coins are hoarded or melted. Only the worthless coins circulate. Rome is forced to admit reality. The government begins demanding taxes in gold. Not silver. Gold. Because everyone, including Rome itself, now knows the silver coins are worthless. The denarius, the currency that built an empire, is dead. The timeline is devastating: 95% silver in 235 AD, 50% silver by 260 AD, 5% silver by 268 AD. Complete currency collapse by 274 AD. 39 years from start to finish, but the final 14 years were catastrophic. Tax revenue, measured in real purchasing power, collapsed by 80% between 250 and 280 AD. The inflation rate over those final 20 years? Approximately 1,000%. Prices increased tenfold while the currency became a sick joke. Merchants began weighing every coin because you couldn't trust face value anymore. Citizens hoarded food because money couldn't be trusted to buy it tomorrow. Trust, the invisible foundation of any currency, evaporated like water in the desert. The political consequences were predictable and terrifying. The empire split into three competing zones: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and the Roman core in the middle. Notice the pattern? The breakaway regions were almost perfectly aligned with the provinces that abandoned the denarius first. The smart money didn't just leave the currency, they left the empire. Here's the lesson that echoes across 1,800 years: the provinces abandoned the denarius 15 years before Rome itself admitted it was worthless. The peripheral powers saw it first. The smart money got out first. The center collapsed last, still clutching its worthless coins and wondering what went wrong. The collapse took 4 decades. The next example moved faster, because the lesson was forgotten, but the printing presses were better. The collapse took 4 decades in Rome. In Weimar Germany, it took 22 months. Jump forward to 1919. Germany emerges from World War I battered but not broken. It's still Europe's industrial powerhouse: advanced manufacturing, educated workforce, world-class engineering. The German Papiermark is stable: 4.2 marks equal $1. Foreign creditors, France, Belgium, Britain, hold mark reserves as collateral for war debt payments. The currency is trusted, international, functional. Then comes the guillotine. The Treaty of Versailles demands 132 billion gold marks in reparations. It's an impossible sum. Germany's entire GDP can't cover it. The economy is shattered from war. Tax revenues have collapsed. Unemployment is soaring. The German government faces the same choice Rome faced: default and face foreign occupation, or print money and buy time. They choose the printing press. The Reichsbank calls it a temporary measure. They call it stimulus to aid recovery. They promise it's carefully controlled, scientifically managed, absolutely necessary to restart the economy. Every economist in Germany nods along. Every politician votes yes. Every newspaper editorial supports the decision. Sound familiar? But out beyond Germany's borders, the foreign creditors are watching. And they're not stupid. France holds massive mark reserves. So does Belgium. Britain has significant exposure. These aren't amateur investors, they're sovereign treasuries with analysts tracking every move. And they notice the velocity of the printing. In 1922, the French treasury quietly begins converting mark reserves to gold. No announcements. No press conferences. Just steady, silent liquidation. Belgium follows within months. British creditors start buying up German real estate and factories at fire sale prices, converting their paper marks into hard assets before the window closes. They're following the same script Rome's provincial governors followed. They're reading ahead in the play. They know how Act 3 ends. Meanwhile, inside Germany, the acceleration begins. January 1922, $1 equals 300 marks. Germans think this is the bottom. July 1922, $1 equals 800 marks. The government insists it's temporary turbulence. December 1922, $1 equals 7,000 marks. People start to panic, but it's already too late. Then comes 1923, and the numbers become surreal. The Reichsbank goes into overdrive. 29 paper mills run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing nothing but producing paper for currency. 1,783 printing presses operate simultaneously, stamping out marks in denominations that grow more absurd by the week. Million mark notes. Billion mark notes. Trillion mark notes. By October 1923, prices are doubling every 3.7 days. Not months. Not weeks. Days. Workers demand payment twice daily because their morning wages are worthless by evening. They bring wheelbarrows to collect their pay, not because they're rich, but because the cash is so voluminous and so worthless they need a wheelbarrow to carry enough for a loaf of bread. Then they run, literally run, to the nearest store to spend it before it loses more value. Restaurants print new menus every hour. You sit down, order a coffee for 5,000 marks, drink it slowly, and when the bill comes it's 8,000 marks because prices changed while you were sitting there. A loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. Children play with bundles of million-mark notes in the streets because they're more abundant than toys and worth less than scrap paper. People wallpaper their homes with worthless marks because it's actually cheaper than buying wallpaper. The currency has become decorative trash. November 1923, $1 equals 4.2 trillion marks. Read that again. The same 4.2 that once bought a dollar now requires 12 zeros after it. The papier mark isn't a currency anymore. It's kindling. It's wallpaper. It's a cruel joke printed on increasingly worthless paper. From stability to complete worthlessness, 22 months. The human cost is incalculable. Life savings, gone. Pensions, worthless. The middle class, the backbone of German society, is annihilated overnight. Teachers, doctors, engineers, small business owners who saved responsibly for decades watch their entire life's work evaporate like morning dew. The social contract shatters. Trust in government, in banks, in money itself, destroyed. The political consequences? The Weimar Republic limps along for another decade, but it's already dead. The hyperinflation trauma creates the conditions for extremism. By 1933, Hitler rises to power, riding a wave of rage and resentment from a population that watched their government destroy them. 9 years later, the world is at war again. Here's the lesson: the foreign creditors saw it coming in 1922. They read the data. They watched the printing velocity. They got out early. By the time ordinary Germans understood what was happening, the exit was already blocked. The smart money was already gone. And everyone else was left holding paper that wasn't worth the ink. But at least Weimar was a regional currency. The next example involved the world's reserve currency, and the collapse nearly took down the entire global system. Rome took 39 years. Weimar took 22 months. Britain's pound sterling, the world's reserve currency for over 200 years, took 6 years of visible dumping to die. Step back to 1945. The British pound isn't just a currency, it's an institution. For 2 centuries, it's been the language of global commerce. At its peak in 1955, 40% of the world's foreign exchange reserves are held in pounds. The sterling area encompasses dozens of countries whose currencies are pegged to London. Britain may have been exhausted by war, but the pound still rules. The empire is crumbling, but the currency remains. Or so they believe. The crisis builds slowly, then all at once. Post-war debt is crushing. Maintaining the remnants of empire, military bases from Singapore to Cyprus, bleeds money. The pound is overvalued, making British exports uncompetitive. But rather than face reality, rather than devalue honestly and take the political heat, Britain chooses the path of every dying hegemon: print domestically, borrow from the IMF, and lie about gold reserves. Between 1964 and 1967, the British government runs a masterclass in denial. They promise the pound is stable. They insist reserves are adequate. They claim everything is under control. But across the English Channel, one man isn't buying it. French President Charles de Gaulle doesn't trust paper promises. He studied history. He knows what happened to Rome's denarius. He understands that reserve currencies always collapse under the weight of their own privilege. And he's watching Britain's money supply expand while its gold reserves quietly shrink. In 1965, de Gaulle makes a decision that will echo through financial history. He sends French warships to Portsmouth to physically collect French gold from the Bank of England. Not requests. Not polite diplomatic letters. Warships. Military vessels dock in British ports and load gold bars, 400 troy ounces each, onto French Navy ships because de Gaulle doesn't trust Britain to honor paper claims. Then he goes public. In a press conference that stuns the financial world, de Gaulle openly questions whether the pound, and by extension, the dollar, has adequate gold backing. He demands a return to honest money. He calls the reserve currency system a fraud that allows Anglo-Saxon powers to print while everyone else works. The domino effect begins immediately. Germany quietly converts pound reserves to gold. Switzerland follows. Even small nations like the Netherlands begin dumping pounds for hard assets. Every sophisticated treasury in Europe is reading the same data Britain is trying to hide. And they all come to the same conclusion: get out now. The acceleration is breathtaking. In just 6 months during 1967, $3 billion in pound reserves are liquidated. To understand the scale, that's equivalent to $30 billion in today's terms, dumped in half a year. The Bank of England loses 30% of its gold reserves in a matter of weeks. Picture the scene: bank vaults that once stood floor to ceiling with gleaming gold bars now show bare concrete. British officials stand helplessly as every major trading partner lines up to redeem paper for metal. The queue of countries demanding their gold back grows longer each day. And Britain can't say no, because the moment they refuse redemption, the game is over. November 1967, Britain surrenders. The pound is devalued 14.3% overnight. £1, which bought $2.80 yesterday, buys $2.40 today. Decades of "the pound is stable" propaganda shattered in a single evening announcement. But the real catastrophe is just beginning. The devaluation doesn't stop the bleeding, it confirms that every suspicion was correct. The dumping accelerates. By 1971, the United States, watching Britain's reserve currency die in real time, realizes the dollar is next. Nixon closes the gold window entirely, ending gold convertibility and detonating the entire Bretton Woods system. Britain's collapse forced America's hand. Why 1976, less than a decade after promising stability, Britain is begging the IMF for a bailout. The once mighty pound, the currency that financed the Industrial Revolution and ruled the seas, is now a charity case. By 1992, Britain is ejected from the European exchange rate mechanism after another speculative attack. The humiliation is complete. The timeline is stark: from 1949 to 1976, 27 years from dominant reserve currency to irrelevance. But the real collapse? That happened between 1965 and 1971. 6 years. From de Gaulle's warships to Nixon's shock, just 6 years of visible dumping destroyed 200 years of monetary dominance. Here's the number that should terrify you. In 1955, the pound represented 40% of global reserves. By 1975, just 10%. A 30 percentage point collapse in 20 years, with most of the damage concentrated in that final 6-year window. The pound was the reserve currency for 200 years. It took 6 years of visible dumping to kill it. China has been dumping dollars for 18 months. Sound familiar? Because what China is doing today isn't innovation, it's the exact same playbook France used in 1965. Except this time, the scale is 100 times larger. Now let's talk about what's happening right now. Today, while you're watching this, China has dumped $329 billion in US Treasury bonds since their 2022 peak. That's not speculation. That's not analysis. That's reported data from the US Treasury Department itself. At the same time, they've accumulated a minimum of $340 billion in gold, and that's just the official number they're willing to admit. But here's what should terrify you: the dump is accelerating. First quarter 2022, China reduced Treasury holdings by $20 billion. First quarter 2023, $38 billion. First quarter 2024, $53.3 billion. See the pattern? Each quarter, the selling pressure increases. They're not slowing down. They're speeding up. On the gold side, China reported 26 consecutive months of gold purchases from January 2023 through March 2025. Official reserves increased from 1,948 tons to 2,257 tons. But anyone who understands how Beijing operates knows those numbers are fiction. Chinese state entities are buying gold through London, through Switzerland, through Hong Kong, purchases that never appear in official reports. Conservative estimates put their actual reserves between 4,000 and 6,000 tons. That's double what they're admitting. Every month, Chinese cargo aircraft land in Shanghai carrying pallets of gold bars, 400 troy ounces each, stacked and rolled into climate-controlled warehouses that didn't exist 5 years ago. Meanwhile, in Treasury auction rooms in New York, the bids from Chinese state banks grow quieter each quarter. The silence is deafening. And China isn't alone. Russia dumped 96% of its Treasury holdings, almost complete liquidation. Japan, America's closest ally in Asia, has reduced its Treasury position by $240 billion since 2022. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar system, cut its U.S. debt holdings by 34%. These aren't random portfolio adjustments. This is coordinated exit. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus 40+ nations now exploring membership, is actively building dollar alternatives. The mBridge digital currency settlement system. Bilateral trade agreements in yuan, rupees, and reals. They're constructing the infrastructure for a post-dollar world, and they're doing it in plain sight. Meanwhile, the warning signs inside the United States are flashing red. The federal deficit is $2 trillion annually, and the government is printing money to cover it. Interest payments on the national debt now exceed defense spending. We're spending more servicing our debt than funding the entire military. The Federal Reserve is buying 40% of Treasury issuance, which is just a technical term for monetizing the debt. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 72% in 2001 to 58% in 2024. And BRICS nations' combined GDP now exceeds the G7 in purchasing power parity terms. Every single one of these metrics is screaming the same thing: Stage 4 has begun. The accumulation is now visible. The dumping is now public. The pattern is now undeniable. Here's what China knows that most Americans don't: they watched Rome debase silver for decades before the denarius collapsed. They studied Weimar's printing presses and the 22-month death spiral. They analyzed Britain's gold hemorrhage and the 6-year destruction of a 200-year reserve currency. Beijing didn't just read this history, they internalized it. They built entire departments to study reserve currency collapse patterns. And they decided, get out before the exits close. Most analysts agree that once dollar reserves drop below 50% of global transactions, the death spiral becomes irreversible. We're at 58% right now. We're 8 percentage points from the point of no return. And China is dumping $50+ billion per quarter. The question you should be asking is, what do they know that we don't? Or more accurately, what do they know that we refuse to admit? Here's why this time is different, and by different, I mean catastrophically worse. Every previous reserve currency collapse was regional. When Rome's denarius died, it affected 3 continents and maybe 70 million people. When Weimar's mark imploded, it devastated Germany and triggered political chaos across Europe. When Britain's pound collapsed, it shook the global system but remained containable. The dollar is different. The dollar is everywhere. There are $14 trillion in offshore dollar holdings circulating in what's called the eurodollar market, dollars held outside the United States, outside Federal Reserve control, financing everything from Asian manufacturing to African infrastructure. There's $60 trillion in dollar-denominated debt worldwide, governments, corporations, and individuals who borrowed in dollars and must repay in dollars. When the dollar collapses, it doesn't just hurt Americans. It obliterates emerging markets holding dollar debt. It demolishes pension funds from Tokyo to Toronto. It wipes out an estimated 40% of global savings. The cascade effect will be biblical. And here's the nightmare: it will happen faster than any previous collapse. Rome took 39 years. Weimar took 22 months. Britain's visible collapse took 6 years. The dollar? It will collapse in months, maybe weeks. Why? Digital trading velocity. In 1965, de Gaulle had to send warships to physically move gold. Today, a central bank can dump $50 billion in treasuries with a keystroke. The speed of modern finance means the death spiral, once it begins, will be unstoppable. We are currently in stage 4. The reveal. China's dumping is now public knowledge. Gold prices are surging, from $2,000 per ounce in January 2023 to $2,650 in June 2024, a 32.5% increase in 18 months. Other nations are following China's lead. The pattern is visible to anyone paying attention. Stage 5 begins when the dollar drops below 50% of global reserves. We're at 58% right now. That's 8 percentage points. At the current pace, $50 billion per quarter from China alone, plus accelerating dumps from Japan, Saudi Arabia, and others, we could hit that threshold within 12 to 18 months. And once we cross below 50%, panic selling begins. Imagine every nation on Earth simultaneously rushing to the same exit, all at once, in the dark. The stampede becomes self-fulfilling. The Fed will face an impossible choice: raise interest rates to defend the dollar and collapse the economy into depression, or print more money to buy treasuries and accelerate the currency's death. They'll choose printing. They always do. And the very act of defending the currency will destroy it. When the Treasury auction fails, and it will fail, the Federal Reserve will print the difference. They'll monetize the debt openly. And that's when stage 6 begins. From that moment, the timeline to complete reserve currency loss is 12 to 24 months. Maximum. American policymakers will insist it's different. They'll point to the world's largest military. They'll cite technology dominance, rule of law, the depth of capital markets. Every hegemon in history believed they were special. Rome thought their legions made them invincible. Britain thought 200 years of naval dominance guaranteed another 200. They were all wrong. Here's how you know American policymakers understand what's coming. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen flew to Beijing twice in 6 months, personally begging Chinese officials to keep buying treasuries. Not for trade deals. Not for diplomacy. Begging them to keep buying our debt. They refused. When Rome collapsed, it affected 3 continents. When Weimar collapsed, it triggered a world war. When the dollar collapses, there is no plan B. 60% of global trade stops. Supply chains shatter. The international system that has governed commerce for 80 years ends. So what happens next? History has already written the script. The only question is whether you'll recognize the final act before it begins. Let me bring this full circle. In the 3rd century, Roman provincial governors hoarded gold while the empire debased silver. In 1922, French bankers fled marks for metal while Germany printed. In 1965, de Gaulle sent warships for British gold while London lied about reserves. In 2024, China dumps treasuries for gold at record pace while America insists everything is fine. The pattern never changes. Only the names, dates, and speed of collapse. Every single time, the peripheral powers see it first and exit first. Every single time, the center insists it's different until it's too late. Rome thought they were eternal, that their legions and their civilization made them immune to economic reality. Weimar thought they could print their way to prosperity, that monetary expansion would solve fiscal crisis. Britain thought 200 years of dominance guaranteed 200 more, that history and tradition could replace gold backing. America thinks military superiority and tech sector innovation make us immune to economic gravity. They were all wrong. We are wrong. The question is no longer whether the dollar loses reserve status. China has already made that decision for us. Russia has made that decision. Japan and Saudi Arabia are making that decision right now. The question is when the tipping point hits, and whether you'll be holding paper or real assets when it does. You now know what China knows. You've seen the pattern that Rome's governors saw, that France's treasury saw, that no amount of propaganda can hide. The question is whether you'll act on it. Because let me be crystal clear, there is no painless version of this. There is no soft landing. There is no managed decline. Every reserve currency collapse in history was catastrophic for those holding the paper. This one will be worse because the scale is global. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes perfectly, and right now, the rhyme scheme is deafening. The dump has already begun. The gold is already being loaded onto planes in Shanghai. The pattern is already in motion. Your grandparents might have lived through Britain's collapse. Your great-grandparents might have heard stories of Weimar. You are about to watch the dollar follow the same path, unless you understand the lesson they learned too late. Paper is a promise. Gold is reality. And when the promises break, reality doesn't care about your portfolio. If this analysis connected dots you hadn't seen before, hit subscribe. History has all the answers, but only if you're willing to look at what it's actually saying, not what you want it to say. China isn't making a trade. They're reading the obituary of a currency and writing it at the same time. The only question is whether you'll be reading along or wondering what happened after it's already over.